There's a natural evolution in parent-child relationships that many of us aren't prepared for. After decades of being the guide, the provider, the decision-maker, something shifts. The dynamic changes, often in ways that leave us feeling uncertain of our place. Perhaps your suggestions are met with eye rolls. Maybe your experiences are dismissed as outdated. Or perhaps conversations have taken on a patronizing tone that leaves you feeling diminished rather than cherished. This transition can be painful. When the children you raised begin treating you with less respect than you deserve, it's natural to feel hurt, confused, even betrayed. You might be tempted to remind them of all the sacrifices you made, the sleepless nights, the unconditional support you've provided through their lives. But here's what's important to understand. Confrontation rarely leads to connection. Instead, there's a more mindful, dignified approach to rebuilding that mutual respect. Today, I'm sharing 6 transformative practices that can help you navigate this challenging terrain. These aren't quick fixes, but rather profound shifts in how you show up in the relationship. Changes that can gradually transform how your adult children perceive and interact with you. These approaches might challenge your assumptions, but if you stay with me until the end, you'll discover how to reclaim your dignity while deepening the connection with your children. Let's begin this journey together. Practice 1. Cultivate self-sufficiency. One of the most common patterns I see in parent-child relationships that have lost their balance is parents who have become emotionally dependent on their children's validation. This dependence creates an invisible pressure that your children can sense, even if they can't name it. When you need their approval, their time, or their attention too intensely, you inadvertently position yourself as subordinate in the relationship. You might find yourself accommodating their every preference, agreeing when you'd rather not, or sidelining your own needs to avoid any friction. I remember working with David, a retired professor who prided himself on his intellectual contributions throughout his career. Yet around his adult children, he became almost unrecognizable, hesitant to express opinions, quick to defer to their judgments, always available regardless of his own plans. "I just want them to want me around," he confided. What David couldn't see was that his constant availability and accommodation wasn't earning their respect, it was eroding it. When he began prioritizing his own well-being and speaking his truth even when it differed from theirs, something remarkable happened. His children started seeking his perspective, valuing his time, and treating him with renewed consideration. The truth is counterintuitive but powerful. Respect isn't earned through self-sacrifice, it's cultivated through self-honor. When you demonstrate that you value yourself, you teach others how to value you. Set boundaries when needed. Express your authentic thoughts. Make choices based on your own values rather than their anticipated reactions. Because when you stop seeking their approval, you create space for them to freely offer their respect. Practice 2. Respond rather than react. When facing dismissive or disrespectful behavior from your adult children, your instinctive response might be defensive. To assert your authority, remind them of your wisdom, or point out their ingratitude. This reaction is understandable, but rarely effective. Consider what happens when you meet disrespect with indignation. The interaction becomes about power rather than connection. And in a power struggle, everyone loses something precious: the opportunity for genuine understanding. I worked with Elena, a woman whose relationship with her daughter had deteriorated into tense exchanges and emotional distance. During our sessions, Elena realized that whenever her daughter spoke down to her, she immediately became combative, trying to reclaim the respect she felt was being denied. But fighting for respect, she later reflected, only proved I felt I didn't have it. Elena made a conscious decision to break this cycle. When her daughter next spoke dismissively about Elena's suggestion, instead of defending herself, Elena simply took a breath, maintained her composure, and responded with quiet confidence, "I've shared my perspective. You'll make whatever choice feels right to you." That small shift, from reactive to responsive, created an immediate change in the dynamic. Her daughter, expecting the usual defensive reaction, was instead met with dignified self-assurance. Over time, these moments accumulated, gradually changing how her daughter perceived and interacted with her. If your children have fallen into patterns of disrespect, don't meet that energy with its mirror image. Instead, respond from a place of inner security. Speak with measured confidence. Listen fully before responding. Maintain your dignity even when it feels challenged. Because true respect isn't demanded through confrontation, it's inspired through consistent self-respect. If you're finding value in these insights, please comment "mindful parenting" below to join our conversation. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and enable notifications to receive our upcoming content. Your engagement helps us create more resources to support your journey. Practice 3. Nurture your own fulfillment. One of the most profound gifts you can give both yourself and your adult children is to cultivate a life that brings you genuine joy and purpose independent of your role as their parent. This shift is particularly crucial in the later chapters of parenting. When your identity, happiness, and sense of purpose become overly centered on your children's lives, two problematic dynamics often emerge. You may feel increasingly unfulfilled as they naturally focus on building their own lives, and they may begin to experience your involvement as a burden rather than a blessing. I remember working with Margaret, whose 3 adult children had gradually begun limiting their communication with her. During our conversations, it became clear that Margaret's calls to her children weren't exchanges but rather attempts to fill the emptiness in her own life. She questioned them extensively about their activities, offered unsolicited advice, and expressed hurt when they didn't respond with the enthusiasm she sought. With gentle guidance, Margaret began redirecting her considerable energy. She joined a community garden, took a watercolor class, and volunteered teaching English to newcomers. As she developed these meaningful connections and pursuits, something shifted in her relationship with her children. They began reaching out more frequently, genuinely curious about her new activities. Their conversations became more balanced, more mutually satisfying. The wisdom here is profound. When you demonstrate that you're living a purposeful, joy-filled life, your children see you as a whole person, not merely as an extension of their world. This perception fundamentally changes how they relate to you. If you sense that your children have begun taking you for granted or treating you with less consideration, examine whether you've inadvertently made them responsible for your fulfillment. Then take courageous steps toward cultivating your own sources of meaning, connection, and purpose. Because when you show that your happiness doesn't depend on them, you free them to connect with you from a place of genuine desire rather than obligation. Practice 4. Establish clear boundaries with compassion. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of maintaining respect in any relationship is the consistent enforcement of healthy boundaries. This becomes particularly complex with adult children, where years of established patterns and emotional attachments can make boundary setting feel like rejection. Yet boundaries aren't walls. They're the essential frameworks that allow real intimacy to flourish. When you clearly communicate what behaviors you will and won't accept, you create the conditions for mutual respect to grow. I worked with Thomas, a widower whose weekly dinners with his adult children had become a source of distress rather than joy. His children would arrive late without notice, speak over him during conversations, and occasionally make dismissive comments about his outdated perspectives. Thomas endured this treatment, believing that asserting himself would damage these precious relationships. Through our work together, Thomas developed the courage to address these patterns directly. Before their next dinner, he sent a thoughtful message expressing his love for these gatherings while clearly stating his expectations. "Our time together means the world to me. To make it enjoyable for everyone, I'd appreciate if we could all arrive on time or give a heads up if running late, allow each person to finish their thoughts during conversations, and approach our different perspectives with curiosity rather than dismissal." The initial response was mixed, some defensiveness, some surprise, but over time, a remarkable shift occurred. The dinners became more respectful, more engaged, and ultimately more connecting for everyone involved. If your children have grown accustomed to treating you with less respect than you deserve, it's likely because previous boundaries have been inconsistent or absent. Changing this dynamic requires courage, the willingness to clearly state your expectations and to follow through with consequences when those boundaries are crossed. This doesn't mean cutting off relationship. It means temporarily stepping back when treatment becomes disrespectful, then re-engaging when interaction can occur with mutual consideration. If you're still with me and finding these reflections helpful, please comment "Boundary Wisdom" below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I encourage you to join our community and activate notifications for future content. Your support allows us to continue providing these insights. Practice 5. Give consciously, not compulsively. One of the most beautiful aspects of parenthood is the desire to give, to support, to assist, to make life easier for our children. This generosity is natural and often deeply fulfilling. However, when giving becomes compulsive rather than conscious, when it continues regardless of how it's received, it can unwittingly foster entitlement rather than appreciation. Consider the difference between these two approaches: giving from a place of conscious choice versus giving from obligation or habit. The first strengthens mutual respect, the second often diminishes it. I worked with Sophia, a mother who had always been extraordinarily generous with her time and resources. She watched her grandchildren whenever asked, lent money without expectation of repayment, and constantly offered practical help with household tasks. Yet despite this continuous giving, she felt increasingly taken for granted. Through our sessions, Sophia realized that her generosity had become so consistent, so expected, that it had lost its meaning. Her children no longer saw these acts as gifts but as baseline expectations. When she occasionally couldn't help, they responded with frustration rather than understanding. Sophia began a thoughtful recalibration of her giving, not reducing her generosity, but making it more intentional. She started expressing when helping would be difficult for her rather than automatically saying yes. She began acknowledging when she felt her assistance wasn't properly appreciated. And most importantly, she learned to give when it genuinely felt good to do so, rather than from fear of disappointing others. The initial adjustment was uncomfortable for everyone. But gradually, her children began treating her contributions with greater appreciation. They started acknowledging her efforts, respecting when she couldn't help, and even reciprocating in ways they hadn't before. If you find your generosity consistently met with entitlement rather than gratitude, it may be time to make your giving more mindful. Consider whether you're giving from joy or from fear: fear of rejection, fear of no longer being needed, fear of conflict. Then begin the practice of giving only when it comes from a place of genuine desire rather than obligation. Because when giving becomes conditional on mutual respect, the relationship naturally rebalances toward greater reciprocity. Practice 6. Embody the elder, not the dependent. Perhaps the most profound shift you can make in relationships with adult children is to consciously step into the role of the elder, a position of wisdom, perspective, and self-contained dignity, rather than positioning yourself as dependent on their attention or validation. Throughout human history, elders have held a special place in family and community structures. They were respected not because they demanded it, but because they embodied qualities worthy of respect: wisdom gained through experience, perspective that comes from seeing the larger patterns of life, and a steadiness that younger generations could rely upon. I worked with James, who had spent decades as a successful business owner before retirement. Yet in his relationship with his children, he had fallen into patterns of seeking their approval, deferring to their judgments, and positioning himself as needing their guidance rather than offering his own wisdom. Through our conversations, James reconnected with the quiet confidence that had served him throughout his professional life. He stopped apologizing for his perspectives. He began sharing his experiences not as mandates but as offerings, available if desired. He cultivated a kind of serene self-sufficiency, emotionally present but never demanding. The transformation in his relationships was remarkable. His children began seeking his counsel, valuing his insights, and treating him with a newfound respect. Not because he insisted upon it, but because he naturally embodied qualities that inspired it. If you sense that your children have begun treating you as somehow diminished, examine whether you've inadvertently been reinforcing this perception through your own behavior. Then make the conscious choice to embody the elder, someone who offers wisdom without imposition, who maintains dignity without defensiveness, who gives love without demanding reciprocation. Because when you fully inhabit the role of the elder, you create space for your children to respond from their highest selves rather than their reactive patterns. If you've stayed with me through these reflections and found them valuable, please comment Elder Wisdom below. And if you haven't yet joined our community, I invite you to subscribe and enable notifications for future content. Your participation helps sustain this sharing of insights. Final thoughts. The journey of rebuilding respect between parents and adult children isn't about returning to the past, to the days when your authority was unquestioned or your guidance automatically heeded. It's about creating something new, a relationship between equals that honors both your shared history and your individual personhood. This transformation doesn't happen through confrontation or demand. It unfolds naturally when you make these 6 profound shifts: cultivating self-sufficiency rather than seeking approval, responding mindfully rather than reacting defensively, nurturing your own fulfillment instead of depending on their attention, establishing clear boundaries with compassion, giving consciously rather than compulsively. and embodying the dignity of the elder rather than the neediness of the dependent. As you implement these practices, remember that change in long-established relationship patterns takes time. There may be initial resistance, confusion, even pushback as the familiar dynamics shift. That's natural. Continue holding your course with patience and compassionate understanding. What you're doing isn't just reclaiming respect for yourself, though that alone would be worthy. You're also offering your children the opportunity to relate to you in more authentic, mutually satisfying ways. You're creating space for a relationship that can continue evolving in beautiful directions throughout the remaining chapters of your shared journey. The respect you seek will return, not because you demanded it, but because you became someone who naturally inspires it through the way you move through the world and relate to yourself and others. Thank you for joining this exploration today. I'd love to hear your experiences with these approaches. Please share in the comments one insight that resonated with you and how you might apply it in your own relationships. Your reflections enrich our collective understanding. If you found value in these perspectives, please support our continued sharing by liking, subscribing, and sharing with others who might benefit. Until next time, I wish you courage and grace on your parenting journey.